That night, when I saw those drops falling into my cup of tea, I understood that betrayal takes many forms, and the worst one wears the face of those we love the most. My name is Marcia Vega. I'm 54 years old, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that my only daughter was slowly trying to murder me, and why, instead of stopping her, I decided to let her continue serving my poison. Before I dive into the darkness that has enveloped my life these past few months, let me tell you about the light I once had. For almost 3 decades, I ran the Vega Gallery, a space that my father founded and that I turned into one of the leading contemporary art venues in the city. My husband Diego and I grew up together in this world of canvases and sculptures. He was an architect, a brilliant man with a unique vision of space and form. We met when he came to design an expansion for the gallery. A year later, we married, under a glass structure that he designed himself in the garden of my family home. Diego had that rare combination of passion and calm. He could get excited talking about a project, gesturing with those large, expressive hands, and then, seconds later, listen with absolute serenity to the problems of a difficult client or our daughter's concerns. Life is a matter of balance, he used to tell me. Like a good structure, it must support both weight and lightness. Luisa was born 3 years after our wedding. From the first moment, she was the center of our universe, a girl with curious eyes who grew up among gallery owners, artists, and architects. I remember her small hands stained with paint, running through the corridors of the gallery, hiding behind sculptures during openings. Diego adored her. Sometimes I would find them in his studio, her sitting on his lap while he explained his plans to her as if he were talking to a colleague, not a 5-year-old girl. She understands everything, he would tell me proudly. She has an eye for beauty that neither you nor I had at her age. Perhaps it was this overflowing love that made the tragedy more devastating. Diego died when Luisa was 16. A car accident on a rainy night. A drunk driver who invaded his lane on the highway. The police said it was instantaneous, that he didn't suffer, as if that made the void he left in our lives more bearable. Luisa changed after her father's death. We all changed, of course. Pain transforms. But in her, the change was deeper, darker. The cheerful, confident girl became a teenager locked within herself. She stopped painting, lost interest in art, architecture. Everything that had once passionate her. She distanced herself from me, as if she blamed everything our previous life represented for Diego's absence. I tried to reach her. God knows I tried. Therapy, trips, long conversations where I would talk, and she would barely respond. There were moments when I thought I had lost her too, that the accident had taken not only my husband, but also my daughter. The change came when Luisa turned 20. She had enrolled in university without much enthusiasm, studying business administration, because I had to study something, in her own words. One day she came home with a light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "I've met someone," she told me during dinner. "A professor. He's different." Rafael Morales entered our lives like a silent storm. He was 35 when he met Luisa, 15 years older than her. He was an associate professor of corporate finance, with an impressive resume and a magnetic presence that filled any room. The first time he came to our house, I noticed how Luisa looked at him, with the same admiration with which she used to look at her father. I won't deny that I had my reservations. The age difference, his position as a professor, the intensity with which the relationship progressed. But after years of seeing my daughter sunk in apathy, how could I oppose the only thing that seemed to bring her back to life? Raphael was charming with me. He showed a genuine interest in the gallery, in my family's legacy, in Diego's work that I had meticulously preserved. Sometimes he reminded me of my husband, that same contained passion, that ability to listen intently. "You've built something extraordinary here, Marcia," he told me one night as I showed him our archive of catalogs. "Not just a gallery, but a refuge for beauty in an increasingly practical world. I understand why Diego was so proud of you." I blushed like a schoolgirl. It had been years since anyone had spoken to me like that, since anyone had recognized my life's work with such precision. Perhaps it was then that I completely lowered my defenses, when I began to see him not as the older man who had seduced my vulnerable daughter, but as the savior who had brought her back to life. How naive I was. They married a year later. An intimate ceremony in the gallery garden, under the same glass structure where Diego and I had married. I watched my daughter smile as she walked toward the altar, wearing a dress we had chosen together, in one of those rare moments of complicity we had recovered. For the first time in years, I felt that our family, although transformed, could be happy again. Raphael left the university shortly after the wedding. He wanted to seek new horizons, he said. He opened a real estate investment consultancy. At first, the business seemed prosperous. He moved in exclusive circles, mentioned important names, talked about ambitious projects. Luisa started working with him, leaving her studies incomplete because real life is the best university, according to Raphael. I didn't approve of that decision, but I bit my tongue. I saw her happy, determined, with a purpose. Who was I to stand in the way? The first 3 years of their marriage passed in apparent harmony. They came to dinner once a week, called me regularly, even began to show interest in the gallery. Raphael suggested new artists, marketing strategies, ways to modernize the business. I implemented some of his ideas, grateful for his interest, for that sense of rebuilt family. It was in the 4th year when I began to notice subtle changes. Last-minute cancellations for our family dinners, tense conversations between them that would stop when I entered the room. A new nervousness in Luisa, an anxiety that made her bite her nails as she did when she was a child. "Is everything okay?" I asked her one afternoon when she had come to the gallery alone, something increasingly rare. "Of course, Mom," she replied with that forced smile I knew so well. "We're just very busy. Raphael is closing an important deal." That important deal became the justification for everything. Their absence, their stress, even the changes in their lifestyle. Suddenly, the modest but elegant apartment they had bought wasn't enough. They needed a bigger house, more luxurious cars, more exclusive vacations. "Appearances," Raphael explained when I expressed concern. "In this business, projecting success is part of success. Perhaps I should have insisted more, inquired more, but I fear that, deep down, I was pleased with this new closeness with my daughter, even if it was built on tensions we pretended not to see. After so many years of distance, any relationship seemed better than none. It was about a year ago when I started feeling ill. At first, they were small discomforts, occasional dizziness, morning nausea, fatigue that I attributed to age, and the work pace I maintained at the gallery. But the symptoms gradually worsened. Days when I could barely get out of bed. Vomiting that left me exhausted. Weight loss that made my clothes hang loosely on my body. I visited several doctors. They did tests, analyses, scans. No one found a clear cause. It could be stress, some said. Maybe a persistent viral infection, others suggested. Sometimes at a certain age, the body simply rebels, concluded an older doctor with that condescending tone I so despise. Curiously, it was during this period of illness that Louisa seemed to grow closer to me. She came almost daily, prepared meals that I could rarely keep down, brought me teas and infusions to strengthen the immune system. She stayed late, making sure I took my medicines. "You don't have to do this," I told her one night, moved by her dedication. "You're my mother," she replied, arranging my pillows. "Who's going to take care of you if I don't?" Raphael was also attentive. He consulted with doctor friends, researched alternative treatments, even suggested taking me to a specialized clinic in Switzerland. His concern seemed genuine, although sometimes I caught him looking at me in a strange way, almost clinical, as if evaluating my deterioration. It was during one of those particularly bad episodes, after a week when I had barely been able to keep food down, that I decided to install security cameras in the house, not out of suspicion, but as a precaution. I lived alone, increasingly weak. What would happen if I fell and couldn't reach the phone? At least this way, Louisa could monitor me from her mobile. I never imagined that those cameras would reveal the most devastating truth of my life. It was an October night. I had managed to eat a little soup that Louisa had prepared before leaving. I felt better than usual, had even managed to check some emails from the gallery. As always, I left my chamomile, tea cooling in the kitchen while I finished getting ready for bed. A noise woke me around midnight. At first, I thought it was one of those night sounds the house makes. But something disturbed me enough to check the camera app on my phone. And there she was, my daughter. She had entered with her key, something she did frequently, especially when I was sick, to check that I was okay. I watched her move in the dim light of the kitchen, stealthy as a ghost. She approached my cup of tea and took out a small vial from her pocket. With steady hands, she counted drops that fell into my drink. Then she carefully stirred with a small spoon, making sure no trace remained. The whole process took less than a minute. Before leaving, she wiped the rim of the cup with a cloth, like a professional, eliminating fingerprints. I held my breath as I watched her leave as silently as she had entered. When the door closed behind her, I dropped the phone as if it burned. The entire world had been reduced to that small screen, to that impossible image of my daughter, methodically poisoning me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things I would have expected to do upon such a discovery. Instead, I got up like an automaton, went down to the kitchen, and stared fixedly at the cup of tea that now contained my death in small sips. With trembling hands, I took a small container and poured some of the tea into it. Then I emptied the rest down the sink, rinsing thoroughly. I went up to my room, stored the sample in the drawer of my nightstand, and sat in the darkness, waiting. For what? Dawn? An explanation? The strength to face what I had just discovered? I didn't sleep that night, nor many of those that followed. For days, I lived in a strange limbo. In the mornings, I received worried calls from Louisa. "How are you feeling today, Mom? Do you need me to come over?" And I, playing the most difficult role of my life, responded normally, as if I didn't know that her hands had poured poison into my cup the night before. Why didn't I confront her? Why didn't I call the police immediately? These are questions I've asked myself 1,000 times since then. The answer is as simple as it is heartbreaking. Because she was my daughter. Because I needed to understand. Because a part of me, the part that held her newborn in my arms, that dried her tears as a child, that saw her collapse after her father's death, refused to believe what my eyes had seen. During the following weeks, I developed a macabre routine. I continued preparing my tea every night, leaving it in the kitchen as always. Sometimes Louisa would come, sometimes not. When she did, I observed through my phone, accumulating evidence, trying to understand the pattern. I never drank the tea, of course. I discarded it and pretended I had drunk it. I began to save small samples of each adulterated tea. I labeled them with dates, hid them in a secret compartment of my jewelry box. I didn't know exactly what I was saving them for, but I felt I needed tangible evidence of what was happening, perhaps because a part of me was still denying reality. I also began to fake symptoms. It was terribly easy after months of real illness. One day I would stagger when walking. Another I would casually mention blurred vision or numbness in my extremities. I carefully observed the reactions of Louisa and Raphael. She showed concern. He asked specific questions about my symptoms, like a doctor developing a diagnosis. "You should consider moving in with us," Raphael suggested during dinner, about 3 weeks after my discovery. "We're increasingly worried about leaving you alone in your condition." "That's very kind, but I prefer my independence," I replied, noticing the flash of irritation that crossed his face. "Besides, the gallery can wait," Louisa interrupted. "Your health comes first, Mom." The gallery. I began to suspect it was part of the motivation. For years it had been not only my passion, but also my main source of income and a considerable investment. The building itself, located in one of the most coveted areas of the city, was worth a fortune. Add to that my personal collection, the apartment, the properties that Diego and I had acquired as investments, a substantial inheritance that would naturally go to my only daughter. But why now? Why in this way? I needed answers that I could only get by keeping my terrible secret. One afternoon, while Louisa was busy in the kitchen preparing one of those medicinal teas that I now recognized as vehicles for my poisoning, I sneaked to her purse and took the keys to her house. The next day, knowing that both would be out all day at a supposed business meeting, I did something I never thought I would do. I furtively entered my own daughter's house. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I found it anyway, in Raphael's office, meticulously stored in a safe whose combination, Louisa's date of birth, so predictable. I knew because he himself had shown it to me once, in case you ever needed to access important documents in my absence. What I found left me breathless. Financial reports showing a company on the brink of bankruptcy. Huge loans, some from lenders who were clearly not traditional banks, unpaid bills, foreclosure notices, all carefully hidden under a facade of prosperity. Also found a file with my name on it. It contained copies of my will. How had they obtained it? Recent valuations of the gallery and my properties, and even, this froze my blood, information about my life insurance, a considerable policy I had taken out after Diego's death, thinking precisely of securing Louisa's future if something happened to me. But the most disturbing were the medical notes, pages and pages about various poisons and their effects, many with symptoms that matched exactly what I had experienced these months. There were notes on dosages, on how to gradually increase them to avoid suspicion, on substances that left no trace in routine autopsies. I left that house feeling like I was suffocating. I drove to a remote park, and there finally, I let out the torrent of emotions I had contained for weeks. I cried for my lost daughter, for the girl she once was, for the woman she had become. I cried for Diego, thankful that he wasn't alive to see what our family had turned into. And I cried for myself, for the mother who had failed in some inexplicable way, who had not known how to protect her daughter from becoming a murderer. When I finally managed to calm down, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. I needed to know how far this conspiracy went, who was really the architect of my programmed death. Because something in all of this didn't fit with the Louisa I knew, even with the distanced and hardened version of recent years. I began to observe them more carefully, not just through cameras, but in our daily interactions. I noticed how Raphael dominated every conversation, how he subtly directed Louisa's actions with a look, a gesture, a seemingly innocuous word. I saw the anxiety in her when he wasn't satisfied, the relief when she received his approval. I also began to invite Carmen, my assistant and closest friend for decades, to our house more frequently. I told her an edited version of my suspicions, enough for her to be alert, but not so much as to alarm her unnecessarily. "There's something strange in Louisa and Raphael's relationship," I told her one day, as we reviewed the catalog for an upcoming exhibition. "Something controlling." Carmen, who had always been direct, nodded without surprise. "I've thought so for years, Marcia. That man isolates her, controls her. Have you noticed she doesn't have friends anymore? That she never speaks without looking at him first, as if asking permission?" So, it wasn't my imagination. Others had seen it too, probably long before me, blinded by the hope of getting my daughter back. One night, approximately 2 months after my initial discovery, Louisa came to the house alone. She seemed agitated, nervous. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that she had come to confess everything, to ask for help, to escape the situation she was in. "Raphael is impatient," she said instead, serving us wine on the terrace. "He says the doctors should be doing more, that your symptoms are getting worse, but no one finds the cause." "Medicine doesn't always have answers," I replied, watching her closely. "Sometimes the body simply deteriorates and we don't know why." Louisa looked away, playing with the edge of her glass. "Mom, I've been thinking, maybe you should update your will. Just as a precaution. Make sure everything is in order, in case." She didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. "In case I die," I completed, noticing how she tensed. "Don't worry, daughter. Everything is perfectly arranged. You are my only heir. You always have been." "It's not because of that," she weakly protested. "It's just that Raphael says these matters must be resolved when you still have mental clarity, in case the illness progresses." "Raphael seems very concerned about my inheritance," I commented, maintaining a casual tone. "It's touching." I saw doubt in her eyes, a flash of awareness perhaps before she hid again behind that mask of filial concern that she had perfected in recent months. That night, after she left, I checked the recordings, and indeed she had poured something into my wine glass while I was in the kitchen looking for some appetizers. The dose seemed larger this time. They were accelerating the process. Time was running out, and I needed a plan. It was Carmen who, unknowingly, gave me the idea. We were reviewing the gallery's event calendar for the coming months. "Don't forget that Louisa and Raphael's anniversary is in 4 weeks," she reminded me. "You mentioned you wanted to organize something special at the gallery. The anniversary. Of course, the perfect setting for my counterattack. An event where all those involved would be present, where I could control every detail, from the food to the drinks." From that moment on, I focused on the meticulous planning of my response. I discreetly contacted a private laboratory to analyze the tea and wine samples I had collected. The results confirmed my suspicions. Arsenic in small but cumulative doses. A classic poison, difficult to detect if not specifically looked for, that produced exactly the symptoms I had experienced. I also hired a private investigator, a former gallery client whom I fully trusted. I asked him to investigate Raphael's past, his businesses, his true financial circumstances. The information he brought me a week later confirmed what I had already discovered, but added a crucial detail. Raphael had debts with dangerous people, the kind of people who don't accept excuses when it's time to pay. He's desperate, the investigator concluded. According to my sources, he has a deadline that expires right after his wedding anniversary. If he doesn't pay, the consequences will be severe. So there was the catalyst, a deadline, an imminent threat. They weren't poisoning me out of simple greed, but for survival. That explained the recent acceleration, the impatience I had noticed in Raphael, the growing anxiety in Louisa. During the weeks leading up to the anniversary, I maintained my act of gradual deterioration. I made sure they saw me increasingly weak, more disoriented. I even hired a nurse who came several times a week, mainly to report to Louisa and Raphael about my worsening. I don't think she'll last much longer, I heard Raphael say on the phone, one afternoon thinking I was asleep in the adjoining room. The nurse says her organs are starting to fail. It's a matter of weeks, maybe days. The coldness in his voice, the barely disguised satisfaction, chilled my blood. But it also reinforced my determination. This man had corrupted my daughter, had turned her into an accomplice to my murder. He deserved to face the consequences. The anniversary fell on a Saturday. I insisted on organizing an intimate but elegant celebration at the gallery, because I might not have another opportunity to see them celebrate another anniversary, I said with the calculated fragility of a dying woman who accepts her fate. Raphael tried to dissuade me, concerned about my health, of course. But Louisa, surprisingly, supported me. "Let Mom do this," she told him during one of their visits. "It means a lot to her." I saw something in her eyes then, a glimpse of the daughter she had been, perhaps even guilt. For a moment, I almost abandoned my plan. Almost. But then I remembered the vials of poison, the meticulous notes, the months of slow agony. No, I couldn't falter now. The preparations for the party gave me a new energy. I personally supervised every detail, the flowers, the lighting, the menu, the wine selection. For the occasion, I redecorated the gallery with some of Diego's favorite works, creating a space that celebrated not only Louisa and Raphael's anniversary, but also the family legacy they were so eager to inherit. The day of the celebration dawned, with a clear sky, almost mocking the darkness that had enveloped our family. I dressed with special care, choosing an elegant black dress that Diego had always loved. "It's perfect for you," he used to tell me. Classic, with a touch of mystery. The guests were few but select, some close family friends, Raphael's partners, my faithful Carmen, and of course the couple we were celebrating. The gallery looked spectacular, illuminated with hundreds of candles that created an intimate and almost magical atmosphere. Louisa was radiant in a red dress that highlighted her. Natural beauty. Despite everything, I felt a pang of maternal pride seeing her enter on Raphael's arm. My little girl had grown into a beautiful woman, if only she had made different choices. Raphael was impeccable in his dark suit, smiling and greeting guests, like the perfect host. No one would have guessed that beneath that facade of success and happiness lurked a desperate man, willing to kill to maintain appearances. Dinner proceeded without incident. I barely touched my food, which didn't surprise anyone given my state of health. I observed Raphael and Louisa interact with the guests, especially with Martín Salgado, one of Raphael's most influential partners. The tension between them was palpable to anyone who knew how to observe. Martine cast skeptical glances when Raphael talked about future projects. Raphael, for his part, maintained a forced smile and constantly refilled Martine's glass, as if hoping that alcohol would soften any uncomfortable questions. After dessert, I announced it was time for the main toast. Carmen helped me stand up, perfectly interpreting her role as a concerned friend. The waiters distributed glasses of champagne, but I specifically requested my special drink, a non-alcoholic cocktail that my doctors allowed me on special occasions. Everyone gathered in the center of the gallery, under the imposing crystal sculpture that Diego had designed for our first joint exhibition. Raphael spoke first. I want to propose a toast to these 5 wonderful years with Luisa, the woman who changed my life, and also to Marcia, my dear mother-in-law, who has given us all so much, to family, the most important thing we have. His hypocrisy turned my stomach, but I maintained my serene expression. It was my turn. Before we toast, I said, noticing how everyone fell silent, perhaps expecting emotional words from a woman on the verge of death. I want to share a reflection that Diego used to make. He said that life is like one of his architectural structures. It is sustained by the balance between what is shown and what is hidden, between what we say and what we keep silent, between appearances and truth. I saw how Raphael imperceptibly tensed his jaw and how Luisa turned slightly pale. I continued speaking with an increasingly firm voice. Today we celebrate not only an anniversary, but also the truth, because without truth, there is no real family, no authentic love, no possible future. I approached them with my glass held high. In a calculated movement, I stumbled slightly, spilling part of my drink on Raphael's sleeve. In the confusion of the moment, while he was cleaning himself and the guests were reacting, I exchanged my glass with his. "I'm so sorry," I apologized, with a smile. These dizzy spells attack me without warning. Raphael, always maintaining appearances, downplayed the incident. "Don't worry, Marcia. Are you okay?" "Better than ever," I replied, now raising his glass. "To family, and to the consequences of our actions." Everyone drank. I watched as Raphael emptied the glass that had been mine, the one he didn't know Luisa had specially prepared for me that night, as I had heard him ask her in a whisper before dinner. "Make sure tonight is the last, that it looks natural, that she goes peacefully during her precious party." 20 minutes later, while I was talking with some guests, Raphael began to sweat profusely. His face turned pale, and he put a hand to his stomach. Luisa rushed to him, worried. I approached calmly. "What's all wrong, dear?" I asked with feigned innocence. I don't know," he stammered, growing increasingly pale. "Suddenly I feel sick." "Perhaps you should sit down," Luisa suggested, giving me a panicked look. She knew exactly what was happening, but she didn't understand how. The guests began to notice that something was wrong. To avoid a public scene, I guided Raphael to my private office at the back of the gallery, followed closely by Luisa. Once there, I closed the door behind us. The moment of truth had arrived. "It's curious how life works, isn't it, Raphael?" I said as he collapsed into an armchair, breathing with difficulty. "One day you plan to poison someone, and the next you taste your own medicine." "What?" He tried to speak, but nausea prevented him. "Mom, what's happening?" Luisa asked, her voice trembling. I turned to her, dropping the mask of weakness I had maintained for months. "I know everything, Luisa. I know you've been putting arsenic in my tea, in my wine, in my food. I saw you with my own eyes. I've been pretending all this time, hoping to understand why my own daughter wanted to see me dead. Louisa collapsed into a chair, with tears running down her cheeks. No, it's not what you think. No? Then explain to me why I found these vials in your closet. I took out the small containers of poison I had collected from her night visits. Explain to me these documents, these plans for after my death. Explain the conversations between you and your husband, planning my natural death. Raphael, still writhing in pain, tried to stay conscious. You don't understand. We needed the money. Martin was going to destroy us. Shut up! I shouted, losing my composure for the first time. You ruined my daughter. You manipulated her, turned her into a murderer. I turned to Louisa, whose face was disfigured by crying and guilt. Why, daughter? What did I do to deserve this? Between uncontrollable sobs, Louisa began to speak. She told me how Raphael had gradually convinced her that I was an obstacle to her happiness. How, after losing millions in failed investments, he had seen in the gallery and my fortune the solution to his problems. How he had manipulated her, making her believe that I had never really loved her, that I had always preferred art, the gallery, Diego's legacy over her. He said the poison was painless. She explained between hiccups that you would simply go to sleep, that it was better than the alternative. What alternative? I demanded to know. Martin Salgado. Raphael intervened, growing weaker but still able to speak. He's not just my partner. He lent money to my company. Money that wasn't his. Money from dangerous people. He gave me 6 months to return it with interest. The deadline expires in 3 days. 3 million, added Louisa, visibly trembling. He said if we didn't pay, they wouldn't just kill us, but you too. That it would be a much more painful death than the one we planned. So there was the complete truth. It wasn't just greed. It was fear. A real fear, based on concrete threats. It didn't justify their actions, but at least it explained the desperation I had detected in them lately. Raphael, growing paler, looked directly at me for the first time that night. What? What did you give me? The same thing you've been giving me. I replied coldly. Arsenic. The dose that Louisa prepared especially for my last night. I'm going to die, he murmured with genuine terror in his eyes. I approached him, leaning down so he could see me clearly. No, Raphael. You're not going to die. I'm not like you. What you drank is enough to make you feel exactly what I've felt these months, but not enough to kill you. I wanted you to know what it feels like when someone who should care for you slowly poisons you. I wanted you to understand the price of your actions. The surprise on his face would have been comical. Under other circumstances, Louisa sobbed more forcefully, this time with relief mixed with overwhelming shame. I went to my desk and took out 2 folders. These are the documents I've gathered over these months. In this first folder are all the proofs of the attempted murder, poison analyses, recordings, testimonies from my nurse, who will confirm the pattern of my improvements when you weren't around. Enough evidence to send you to prison for many years. I let those words sink in before continuing. The second folder contains a check for 3 million, the exact amount you owe Martin. It also includes already prepared divorce papers and transfer, documents for a small apartment in Barcelona that I bought last week. I don't understand, said Raphael, confused by both physical pain and my words. It's simple, I explained. You have 2 options. The first is that I deliver this folder, I pointed to the evidence, to the police tonight. You go to prison. I eventually die. Probably at the hands of Martine's friends when they discover they can't collect through you." I paused, observing their devastated faces. "The second option is this. You, Raphael, sign these divorce papers right now. You take the check, pay your debt to Martine, and disappear forever from our lives. You go to Barcelona or wherever you want, but you never contact Luisa again or come near me or the gallery. If you ever breach this condition, the evidence will go directly to the police." "And me?" Luisa asked, barely audible. I approached her, feeling a mixture of love, disappointment, and something I didn't expect. Hope. "You, my daughter, also have a choice to make. You can go with him, continue down that path of destruction you've embarked on together, or you can stay, accept the conditions I'm going to impose on you, and begin the long and painful process of rebuilding what you've destroyed, if that's even possible." "What conditions?" she asked, eyes fixed on the floor. "Intensive therapy. You'll work at the gallery from the most basic position, without privileges, earning every inch of lost trust. You'll live under my roof, under my rules, and every day, you'll have to look in the mirror and ask yourself if the person you've become is who you really want to be. It will be a long, painful road, with no guarantee that I'll ever be able to trust you completely again." A dense silence fell in the office, interrupted only by Raphael's occasional groans. Finally, Luisa spoke, with a voice that seemed to come from far away. "Why would you do this for me, after what I did to you?" I moved closer, took her face in my hands, and forced her to look me directly in the eyes. "Because a mother's love is the most powerful poison that exists, Luisa. It binds you, transforms you, destroys you sometimes, but it can also save you. And despite everything, I'm still your mother." Raphael didn't take long to sign the papers. In his condition, with the threat of prison, and with an offer of a way out that would allow him to live, he raised no objections. I discreetly called Carmen, who helped me get him out through the back door of the gallery. For the guests, Raphael had suffered food poisoning and needed to rest. That night, after everyone left, Luisa and I sat in silence in my living room. We didn't talk about what had happened. There weren't enough words. Not yet. We simply remained together, contemplating the broken fragments of our relationship, wondering if we could ever put them back together. The next day, as agreed, Raphael collected the check, paid his debt to Martín Salgado, and disappeared from our lives. As I later found out, he flew to Barcelona that same afternoon. The following months were indescribably difficult. Trust is not rebuilt overnight, especially when it has been broken in such a devastating way. There were days when I couldn't look at Luisa without remembering the drops of poison falling into my tea. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, consumed by guilt and remorse. Therapy helped, both her individual sessions and the joint sessions I finally agreed to have. Slowly, painfully, we began to unearth the deep roots of the problem. Her unprocessed pain over Diego's death, my immersion in work as a defense mechanism, the emotional distance that grew between us and that Raphael knew how to perfectly exploit. "He made me feel seen," Luisa confessed in one of our most intense sessions. "At first, at least. He listened to me in a way that I felt you had stopped doing after Dad's death. He made me feel important, necessary." Those words pierced me like knives because I recognized their truth. After losing Diego, I had taken refuge in the gallery, leaving Luisa to deal with her own grief alone. It wasn't intentional, but the damage was done. "I failed you," I admitted. "Not as you believe. Not because I loved the gallery or your father's memory more. I failed you because I didn't know how to accompany you in your grief while dealing with my own. Little by little, session after session, we began to rebuild not the relationship we had had, but a new one, based on a brutal honesty that we had never practiced before. It was painful, sometimes almost unbearable, but also liberating. Louisa began to work at the gallery, as we had agreed. She started from the most basic, cleaning, inventory, assistance in mounting exhibitions. The employees who were unaware of what had happened were surprised by this apparent step back in her position, but soon adapted to the new dynamic. After 6 months, something unexpected happened. One day, while organizing the archive, Louisa found old sketches by Diego, designs for an expansion of the gallery that had never been carried out. "They're beautiful," she told me that night, showing me the plans with a reverence that reminded me of the girl she once was. "Dad had such a clear vision. Why did you never realize them?" "We lacked funding," I replied. Later, when we finally had the resources, he was no longer here. Louisa studied the designs in silence for several minutes. Then, with a determination I hadn't seen in her for years, she said, "We should do it. We should complete his vision." Thus was born our joint project, the expansion of the Vega Gallery, according to Diego's original designs, adapted to current needs. Louisa, who had abandoned her business studies, enrolled in architecture. She worked at the gallery in the mornings and studied in the afternoons, with a dedication that left me breathless. The project became our way of healing, of honoring the past while building a future. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments, when distrust settled back between us like an invisible wall. There were nights when I woke up startled, frantically checking if my tea had been tampered with. There were days when Louisa couldn't look me in the eye, overwhelmed by memories of what she had almost done. But we moved forward, one day at a time, one brick at a time, literally building the foundations of our new relationship while we built the expansion of the gallery. A year after that fateful night, we received news of Rafael. Not directly, but through an article in a local Barcelona newspaper. He had died in a car accident, apparently driving drunk on a coastal road. The article mentioned recent financial problems and speculated about a possible suicide. Louisa cried when I showed her the news, not from pain, but from something more complex. Relief, guilt, closure. A part of me loved him, she confessed. The part that didn't know his true nature. Does that make me naive? Weak? It makes you human, I replied, holding her hand. We are all vulnerable to those who know exactly what to say, what promises to make, what wounds to touch. A month after receiving the news, Louisa surprised me with an unusual proposal. She wanted us to rename the new wing of the gallery we were building. "I want to call it Renaissance," she said. "Not just for the artistic style, but for what it represents for us. A new beginning after darkness." We inaugurated the Renaissance wing of the Vega Gallery, exactly 2 years after that night when I saw my daughter poisoning my drink. The inaugural exhibition featured a conceptual installation titled Poisons and Antidotes, a collaboration between Louisa and an emerging artist that explored the duality between what destroys us and what saves us. That night, after the last guest left, Louisa and I remained alone in the new central hall, with its impressive glass dome, originally designed by Diego. "Do you regret it?" she suddenly asked. "Regret what exactly?" I replied, though I knew perfectly well what she meant. Not reporting us that night, giving us a second chance. I reflected for a moment before answering. Justice has many forms, Louisa. Sometimes the hardest one is not to punish, but to rebuild. I don't regret it, no. But I do ask myself every day if I did the right thing. And what do you answer when you ask yourself? I looked around at the beauty we had created together from the ashes of our destruction. That sometimes the antidote. For the deadliest poison is not another poison but truth and forgiveness. Not a blind forgiveness that ignores the harm, but one that fully acknowledges it and still chooses to build something new. Louisa nodded with eyes that were moist but serene. Every morning, when I look in the mirror as you asked me to do, I see someone who is about to commit the most unforgivable act. But I also see, thanks to you, someone who is learning to forgive herself. We walked out together under the starry sky. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the gallery, of study, of therapy, of continuous reconstruction. The road was still long, trust still fragile, but we were moving forward. Today, 5 years after that night that changed our lives forever, Louisa and I run the Vega Gallery together. She completed her architecture studies and has added her own touch to her father's vision. I have learned to delegate, to trust again, to live without obsessively checking every drink offered to me. Every night, before bed, Louisa prepares me a cup of chamomile tea as a kind of redemption ritual. And every night I drink it without hesitation, as an act of renewed faith. Because in the end we must choose, to live with fear or to live with love. And I, after all I've been through, choose love, even if it sometimes hurts like the bitterest poison. You know what's strangest about all this? That sometimes, on the quietest nights, when only the echo of our past decisions remains, I wonder if I was actually the one who poisoned Louisa first. With my absences, with my unresolved grief after losing Diego, with the distance I allowed to grow between us. I wonder if every father, every mother, unwittingly pours small drops of their own poisons into their children. Excessive expectations, insufficient attention, love expressed in the wrong way. And then I remember that, just as there are poisons that kill slowly, there are also antidotes that heal gradually. Truth is one of them. Conscious forgiveness is another. And the most powerful of all, the willingness to change, to rebuild, to allow something new, something different, something perhaps stronger and more beautiful than what we had before, to arise from the ashes of what was. That night when I saw my daughter poisoning my drink, 2 lives could have ended. Mine literally, hers figuratively. Instead, I decided to let her serve her poison, only to show us both that there are poisons from which we can recover, wounds that can heal, relationships that can be reborn, transformed. I wouldn't recommend this path to anyone. It was dangerous, painful, almost impossible at times. But for us, it worked. And every morning when I open my eyes to this new life we've built together from the rubble of the previous one, I can't help thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, that was the best decision I ever made, to allow the poison to transform us rather than destroy us.